Hey, good people. Welcome to our discussion this week, where we are going to be talking about the basic concepts of social welfare. And this is going to cover several chapters in your textbook. And I will be showing you, and actually, I'll get there now. I'll be sharing with you the PowerPoints for these particular chapters. So, and hoping that this will kind of help with the discussion and with your reading so that as you're reading along in the textbook, and you're reviewing the PowerPoints that are available for you. Hopefully this brief lecture will help to supplement and answer and address some of the issues that you may be reading about. So when we get started in talking about some of the basic concepts of social welfare, some of the things we have to be able to acknowledge is the fact that there are, yes, very specific social issues that come to play or that are brought to our attention on a regular basis. And we have to kind of ask ourselves, how are we, society as a whole, addressing these issues? But then also when we bring it closer to home within our profession, the helping profession, whether it is human services, whether it's social work, whether it's counseling, how are we addressing some of these issues that our clients, consumers, or patients may be dealing with on a regular basis? We have to know that coming from it as a social worker, that there are various levels to the social work profession. So we want to make sure that we have that part straight. And when I speak about the various levels of working as a social worker, I mean that we have paraprofessionals with no degree or even going to our professionals with an associate's degree. Then we have our professionals with bachelor's degree, with master's degree, and then also with doctorate degrees. So working as a social worker, a helping professional, with a degree in social work basically is meaning that you're looking at things from a very specific perspective. And when we begin to look at some of the social issues from a social welfare perspective, this is where, again, we have to begin to think about what we're thinking about, begin to assess what's going on for the people that we're working with, our clients, consumers, or patients, and what is going to be the best way to address some of these issues. So beginning with, again, just the whole idea of the perspectives on social welfare. We know that, or I should say, our book talks to us about three different or four specific perspectives that are introduced to us in a chapter, but then we're only going to be focusing on three throughout the remainder, of the semester. The first perspective or the attitude may be coming from a conservative perspective. Then we have liberals, we move into progressives, and then we also have our populist or our far right perspective. Now, our conservative perspective is one that is looking at the least amount of change, that they focus mostly on tradition and how have we done things in the past, and what was good for the goose is good for the gander, meaning that things just don't need to change. What we've done before, it still can be effective today. Our liberal perspective. Liberals are looking at how can we make things better. They are a group of folks who are in favor of change. They look at progressive movement, looking at how can we make things better. And when we talk about social welfare, looking at how can we make some of these social welfare programs work better for our clients, consumers, or patients. When we look at the progressive category or progressive attitude, again, they're also still in favor of change, but they want to have that structure. They want to have a method to the madness about change. And we want to make sure when we talk about the progressive attitude, we want to make sure that when we're doing change, that we don't go too far, that we don't push the envelope beyond what we're capable of doing. When we break things down and we get to this populist or the far right perspective, they're looking at and believe that change is too much, that some of the change that we've done has gone too far. And also looking at the possibility of considering how could we eliminate some of the social welfare programs that have already been initiated. But again, as we're moving forward throughout this semester and throughout exploring some of these topics, we're going to be focusing on just the three basic perspectives. And that's going to be conservatives, liberals, and the progressives. Now, I do want to go back a little bit, good people, and say that when we're talking about conservative, liberal, and progressive perspectives, as it relates to the content of this course, I want us to be mindful that we're looking at it from a professional perspective. although it does feed into political ideology, we're looking at this specifically from a professional perspective of what it is we would like to see happen when we're working with our clients, consumers, or patients. Okay, so when we're talking about, again, conservative, liberals, and perspectives, throughout this chapter, we are going to be looking at things or exploring things from a human nature perspective, looking at it from individual perspective, from the family's perspective, and then also from the social system. So when we go back and we talk about it from human nature, conservatives have this perspective or have this idea that people people pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And when people are given the opportunity to do good, they do good. But then they also believe that sometimes, unfortunately, people can be a little, oh, that L word, a little bit lazy, a little bit aloof, and not really wanting to put forth the effort to do well. The liberal perspective has a more optimistic viewpoint, and they believe that people have a desire, have the want to do good, and they have the desire to wanting to see better for themselves. The progressive perspective also has that optimistic viewpoint, and they believe that people inherently have good within them. However, that they also believe that that optimistic perspective, that good, inherently good feeling that folks have or desire to be good, that it also, it can be taught along the way. We're looking at it from the individual's behavior. Again, going to conservative perspective, they believe that people, individuals can be groomed to be better, can be groomed to want to have the want to. However, sometimes there is that that lack of responsibility. There is that lack of want to. That conservative perspective believes that the way that I made it, if I can do it, then you can do it too. But you just have to have the want to. You just have to have the fortitude. The liberal and the progressive perspective, they look at things from the individual's perspective or individual behavior as, yes, this individual person, the work does come from you and the motivation from you, but also we got to be mindful of what's the environment like. That's what the liberals and the progressive looks at. They also look at, when we think about the environment and the changes within the environment, how does that impact the thought process? How does that impact the motivation of the individual? When we talk about it from the family, that family for the conservatives are all about the traditional aspect, that the family governs the family. The family unit is the family unit, and the family survives based on the unit functioning in and of itself. They believe that there should be no interference from the outside. That liberal perspective looks at that the family unit, yes, it is still governing itself, but there is a change in the family unit. We're looking at the family unit changing, and we're looking at not our family comprised of the traditional aspect of mom, dad, 2 kids, and a dog named Spot, but we may have a single parent and with several children as a family unit. We may have same-sex couples as parents of a family unit. So we're also looking at this liberal perspective of saying that while the family unit is changing, the family unit may at times benefit from having some input, some assistance from the government structure, from an outside entity. The progressive unit, while they are saying that the traditional family structure and the idea of the traditional family structure can be somewhat suffocating, they're also looking at that government assistance can be an advantage for the family system to help elevate them to the next level. When we talk about the system, social system in and of itself, oh my word, good people. The social system in and of itself, the conservatives are saying that, hey, you know, right now things are going good. We recognize that there are bits and pieces that come together that help society to function. And, you know, we don't need to change anything. Everything is well. The liberals are saying that while we recognize the bits and pieces that come together, we got to do some work to make things fair and equitable for people across the board, not just for those who may feel as though they are entitled, but for everyone that may be working within the system. And then we have the progressives. The progressives, again, they're saying that we need to have things fair and equitable, and we need to do things so that everyone across the board is able to function and is able to take advantage of the services that are available. Not take advantage of the system itself, but take advantage of the services that are available. Now, when I move ahead a little bit more, when we're talking about looking at our perspectives based on our profession, the social work profession, the thing that I want to bring out and bring to your attention to people is that we do have structure in place within the social work profession that helps to govern us and helps to guide us when we're trying to figure out what's in the best interest of our client, consumer, or patient. The NASW, the National Association of Social Work, they provide for us a code of ethics, and that code of ethics gives us direction as professionals and how we are to maintain that our boundaries, our professional perspective, and what's going to be in the best interest of our client, consumer, and patient. So when we talk about the NASW, yes, it does have information, and we go down and, oh, I didn't mean to go ahead. And we do talk about looking at things from a political perspective, but we have to have the understanding that with the NASW, we're looking at things from a professional perspective, okay? Now, as we discuss from a professional perspective, the concept of social welfare, we have to have this understanding that some of our clients, consumers, or patients, and actually even within the profession itself, that we will be addressing some of the stigma, some of the negativity, shall we say, that comes from the social welfare or dealing with social welfare. So when we're looking at social welfare, we want to make sure that we have an understanding of how it's being defined. So I want to read to you from the text just a little bit of information about how we are defining social welfare. One of the things that the text says, the first is that it is conceptually clear and unambiguous when we talk about the non-market economic transfers dealing with social welfare. It's easy to separate social welfare services from other services. And we're also looking at it from a second advantage that states that the description of social welfare, is that it is viewed as reducing the stigma of what welfare is when we're talking about it from that non-market transfer. When we're looking at I'm sorry, I lost my word. Looking at how we are reducing the stigma of it being this welfare state, the book goes on to say that social welfare system is popularly, regarded as serving only poor people. However, social welfare programs serving also middle and upper class people receive more government funding. We have to know that social welfare is not just public assistance, where we're looking at someone receiving food stamps, SNAP benefits, cash assistance, but social welfare encompasses folks that have been, I should say, a marginalized population. So, and we get into discussing and reviewing the different groups that social welfare benefits later on throughout the semester, that we'll actually be able to look at specific populations within society, looking at those living in poverty, looking at religion, looking at it based on diversity, looking at it based on age, based on health. So we'll go into that a little bit more. When we talk about social welfare, looking at it as it meets the basic needs. Now, this is another thing that I want to read to you from your text, because it gives us good information and good explanation on how we need to make sure that we are looking at things. And again, and I just changed the slide, I'm sorry, in regards to the non-market economic transfer. Now, when we talk about meeting the social needs, in your textbook, this is coming directly from, or it should say, it says, writing in the Encyclopedia of Social Work, the standard reference source in the field gives the following definition. Social welfare refers broadly to what is needed to provide people with resources and opportunities to lead satisfying and productive lives. It provides the minimum resources, good people. Now we got to think about that. We have to be mindful that when we're talking about the basic concept of social welfare, that we're looking at how people are able to meet their basic needs. What is going on for folks, and how are we able, we meaning the professional, how are we able to assist them so that they are moving beyond the stigma of social welfare, but being provided with the resources to meet their daily needs. Now, when we do this, this is where we have to have this understanding of how the discipline of sociology factors into, or it assists us or provides foundation for us when we're studying social welfare and social work. So part of sociology that you may have reviewed, if you remember, is when we talk about our status and our roles. Our status is how we are defined in any position in society, and our role would be that expected behavior. So when we're looking at social welfare and we're talking about it based on our status and our role, we have to know that there are different combinations of our role set that we may be functioning in. There's different expectations of our behavior. There's different performances that we do in our roles. When we're looking at it from, again, a social perspective, we have to have also this understanding about the various institutions and also the agents of socialization that play a role in how we are making sense of what social welfare is. Now, remember, when we talk about the agents of socialization coming from a sociological perspective, we looked at family, peers, school, and social media. So some of those agents of socialization are still the same when we're looking at it from a social welfare perspective. We look at our family. We look at the primary function of the family and the secondary function of the family. When we talk about the primary function of the family, teaching us, again, the socialization, what's expected of us, what is our role and how are we expected to behave. That secondary function of the family unit, we're looking at social control. Now, what does that mean to you, good people? The secondary function of the family is social control. Now, I want you to think about that as you would be able to apply that to your own family functioning. We talk about the government and politics. Again, we got a primary function of the government. We have a secondary function of the government. Same thing, we look at economics, we look at religion, we look at education. These social institutions, again, are a part of what helps us to have an understanding of what social welfare looks like within the profession, how we make sense of it. I'm going to move ahead here real quickly. Well, I shouldn't say not real quickly, but just to the place where we are looking at social welfare within the United States based on our profession. From our conservative perspective, we know that social welfare does exist. And from this perspective, we know that there is a desire for things to remain the same, that we don't want to have too much change. From a conservative perspective, we know that folks look at things as, if I can do it, you can do it. We got to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. From the liberal and progressive perspective, we're looking at, we have programs in place. Liberals are saying these programs are in place, and while they are good programs, how can we make them better? The progressives are saying, well, you know what? We do want to make them better, but we don't want to make them better that people begin to rely on us too heavily. We want to make things better, but we want to make sure that we also encourage those who are coming along the way. Now, when we talk about encouraging folks along the way, this is where we come full circle a little bit in our third and final chapter. And this third and final chapter should be a refresher for all of you from the introduction to social work, from that course. And I say that because this chapter focuses on how are we making sense of working with the whole person, working with the person in the environment. So this chapter is going to be looking at and talking about, again, this ecological perspective. But we're going to begin with, again, taking a trip back to Intro to Sociology and looking at one of our sociologists, C. Wright Mills, and the work that he brought to the table. Now, C. Wright Mills brought to the table, or I should say in sociology, his perspective was on looking at, oh Lord, I'm losing my words. Hold on one second. I'm sorry. C. Wright Mills, he was a sociologist that brought to us the sociological imagination, meaning that we want to take a look at what's going on in the world around us and how are we making sense of what's going on in the world around us. So when we think about what C. Wright Mills brought to the table, and we look at that from the perspective of this ecological approach, where I'm looking at, again, the whole person. We're thinking about, first of all, what are the problems or what's the issue that's bringing my client, consumer, or patient to me, to see me, and how are they making sense of it? Now, when we talk about the sociological imagination, we're looking at it from the perspective of how they're making sense of it, but then also how is this growing from it being just a problem for an individual to now this is becoming a social issue. And how does that person, our client, consumer, or patient, how are they seeing themselves within this social issue? So when we talk about, again, this whole idea of the person in the environment, we're looking at it from the sociological imagination from C. Wright Mills, thinking about it from the perspective of this is their problem, my client, consumer, or patient's problem. This is how they're making sense of it, but now this is how it's growing into a social issue. When we take it into a social issue, good people, this is where, from the social worker's perspective, we begin to look at things from the macro perspective or a macro practice versus the micro practice. All right, so be mindful when we talk about the macro. Think about it back to Intro to Sociology. The macro is this overarching, the larger picture. Okay, we're looking at what's going on in society as a whole that may be pertaining to my client, consumer, or patient, their problem. So let's take, for example, well, the example that's on this PowerPoint is we're looking at economic stress. We're going through a public health issue that does create a lot of economic stress on an individual and or family. This economic stress that, as we know, can lead to, unfortunately, an outcome of poverty. When we think about the economic stress, the independent variables with that economic stress could be a decrease in employment hours or loss of job. It could be an increase in my financial responsibilities. It could be illness that has come about for a family member. All of these little independent variables lead to the dependent variable, which is poverty. But then when we look at it from a micro perspective, all right, I'm bringing it closer to home. I need to look at what's going on. How is this overarching issue, the macro perspective, how is it impacting my client, consumer, or patient? That would be that symbolic interaction perspective, y'all. A little bit of sociology I threw in there. But how are we making sense of that for our client, consumer, or patient? From the macro perspective, this is where we began to see the foundation of our settlement house movements, where, okay, how about we provide housing? How about we provide food? How about we provide clothing? From the macro perspective, from the settlement house movement to today, we can see how we still see that macro perspective still in play with our subsidized housing that's available, with the social welfare or the food programs that are available, with and the food banks that are available, the family kitchen. We could see with the clothing that may be available. From a micro perspective, historically, this is where we saw the family visitors coming into play. Today, we still see this in play when we think about the macro perspective, when we consider some of the boots on the ground workers that are in our community, such as our community health workers. We have violence interrupters in the community when we're looking at, again, how we're dealing with some of the social issues at play. When we talk about social work and the person in the environment, this is where we kind of see an expansion of the social work profession in working with our clients, consumers, or patients. Now, the textbook goes through and talks about some of the different specifications or specialized areas of social work that you may be interested in or that you may want to pursue, whether it's medical social work, school social work, working with individuals and families, working with children and youth, being a therapeutic social worker. But it all kind of boils down to what part of our foundation is. And that brings us back, again, as I stated, to Intro to Social Work, where we were first introduced to our girl, Mary Richmond. Mary Richmond was the one who implemented and created the whole concept of social diagnosis, meaning that when we're talking about working with the person in the environment, that we look at things from this person, the individual, what their strengths are, and also how the environment is factoring into their response to their issue that they're bringing to you. So again, this ecological perspective, this is our person in the environment. This is what their issue may be, how they are resolving or how they are coping with their issue, and then the environment that they are in. We're looking at the macro, the meso, and the micro level perspectives. The micro is the person. The meso is going to be the systems that are functioning, or that the systems that the person is functioning in. The macro is going to be society as a whole. Okay. So these are our first 3 chapters that we're going through just to talk about the concept of social welfare. So I hope this kind of gives you a little bit of information and clarity on some of the information that you will be reading in the textbook. Please join me on the discussion post, and as I do have some questions that are posted for you. There are supplemental readings in the module that I would like for you to read, and also an assignment that I just want you to, again, to begin thinking about the concepts of social welfare. All right, good people, you know my closing. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, reach out to me either on my office phone or by email. So I bid you love, peace, and bacon grease. I'll see you on the discussion post.